My name is Kilkenny, the host of the Modern Mystic podcast. And today I am so excited and jazzed to be welcoming Alexandra Roxo. She is an artist, best-selling author of Fuck Like a Goddess, spiritual teacher, and transformational coach. She has been featured as a guest speaker on many renowned podcasts and at numerous festivals and events worldwide, and has been featured in multiple TV appearances, including 2 seasons of Netflix hit show Too Hot to Handle. Her work has also been featured in New York Times, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, The Guardian, Nylon, and Playboy. Her latest book, Dare to Feel, comes out with Sounds True in January and explores the language of feeling and heart opening as a spiritual practice. Alexandra, welcome to the Modern Mystic podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, there's so many reasons why I wanted to have you, and I'm so excited for our audience. The first question I ask all my guests, that's only the same question, so I can't wait to hear your answer, is what does it mean to you to be a modern mystic?
So when I consider the path of a mystic in general, I'm going to define it first by defining what it's not, which is the contrast of like the path of the scholar, the student, the learner of the mind, When I think of mystic, I think of embodied lived experience versus experience that comes through the intellect. So the mystic has a direct relationship with the numinous, with the unknown, with the unseen, and with the mystery. A mystic lives less in binary definitions and more in the land of paradox, where things are not black and are not white, because a mystic is humbled by the mystery and knows that there's nothing to know and there's everything to know, and that there's no defining the great mystery. So there is a part of the mystic that is in humble devotion to the mystery and lives in relationship to the mystery and bows at the feet of the mystery and is intrigued and seduced by the mystery, but doesn't try to figure it all out. Like there's more of an artistic seduction, flirtation, embodied knowing versus an intellectual understanding. The mystic also really lives through the heart. There's a lot of heart-gnosis. So a lot of transmission that just comes through the heart's knowing versus the intellect or the mind. So I really think of a mystic. Someone who embodies mystic really deeply is coming with a lot of right-brained relationship to life, to the divine, to the great mystery of why we're here, what this whole reality is all about. And so if you put it in a modern context, it's like, what kind of human, what kind of modern person is available to live in paradox, is available to live within the mystery? The mystery can be so uncomfortable, especially for modern people. Like, to let there be questions dangling in the air is very uncomfortable to modern people, especially Westerners. And so the mystic delights in letting the questions dangle, and the mystic can play with attempting to answer them. But I think a modern mystic knows that there really is no answer, that the answer is in the humble bow. The answer is in the surrender. And so a modern mystic is unafraid to live in uncertainty, is unafraid to live within a question, is unafraid to live within paradox. And a modern mystic doesn't always look like what you would think a stereotype of a mystic would look like.
Yes.
I find that modern mystics often can look like an old man seated outside a gas station in backwoods Alabama, who's just been sitting in that same chair for 20 years every afternoon, versus somebody that you would find on Instagram who's like, I am a modern mystic.
Right.
Mystics are funny like that. They just live that mystic path. And I don't think they always have time to like sort of promote and market themselves. Like, I don't think of mystics in general as being marketing geniuses. I think of mystics as being, the ones that are talking to trees and sort of pondering into the night, maybe over a cup of tea or a bottle of wine. Yeah, they're not always practical people too. They're not always. Some of them can be. I do know some that are, but there's an element of them that lives between the worlds, and so that is the element that's sort of kind of like unplaceable in a way. Like you can't put that part of them in a box, and I think that's the beauty when you come in contact with someone who has that mystical twinkle in their eye, and that they're in relationship with the mystery in a very particular type of way, whether it's through music or poetry or prayer or dancing. But they're within that, like that dance of romance with the beloved, and some part of them will always live that way. So anyway, I could talk about it for a long time.
I love this. We could just not have any other questions, especially like you talked about all the questions we can't really answer at the end of the day anyway. So let's just let's have this one episode all just the answer. I love it so much because your answer was so sumptuous, truly. I mean, just there's so many layers to it that we can unpack and I think are so helpful. I love that one of my favorite words in the world is numinous. So just the fact that you use that, right? And the liminal spaces. And I loved how you talked about as well the paradox, because I think that's so important, because to be a really integrated being on this path of self-knowing, evolution, self-realization, whatever language and semantics our listeners want to use, so much about, I think, in my humble experience, this journey has been about learning to become deeply integrated and the paradoxes of all of it. Because I'm curious about your background a little bit more, because I've heard a little bit and read a little bit. I was introduced such a karmic blessing when I was 5 to the mystical practices. And it sounds like you as a young person had some background as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, the influence of that from being a young person, and then what it was like. Because so many people that I work with my coaching, with the amazing guests on this podcast, found spirituality and mystical practices a little bit later. I think it's more unusual to start pretty young. And so many people will say to me, oh my God, it's such a gift. And I know it's such a gift and it's this huge boon. However, part of my journey has been to really start from a place of these amazing mystical concepts, having these, experiences of the liminal and the numinous, and then figuring out as I age how to fucking be human, which a lot of people, it's the reverse. So I'm curious.
Did you grow up like in a spiritual community or ashram or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I grew up going to an ashram and spiritual communities and in a very intense way. And so I love your work because you talk a lot about this. So let's just start perhaps a little bit with your background. And then the ways that you dance and romance the divine, because I love that, in this moment in time. So let's start back and then.
I always kind of like envied people that grew up like in an ashram or in a spiritual community. I had a friend who grew up within SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, Yogananda's foundation. And, it was just, she was chanting and praying mantra and all of that from a very young age. And my partner grew up in in a more of an intentional community commune versus a spiritual community from a young age. So he had another different alternative view. I did not grow up with an alternative view at my core. I grew up in suburban Georgia, outside of Atlanta, malls and subdivisions and chlorinated pools and mac and cheese and 90s television and MTV, all of that. So I grew up like starkly within the contrasting energy of suburban Americana, like cheerleaders and the whole thing. Like I went football and that kind of thing. So just to give that context, it was like, it's not like I grew up in Berkeley,
Yeah.
But my mother had a spiritual understanding and an alternative understanding from, I think that was just part of her soul's journey in a way. And part of it was because of her healing journey, because she was attempting to heal childhood trauma. And so I think there was like a blending in her world of new age spirituality, which, like, I remember seeing Louise Hay's book on her shelf that was like, you can heal your life. So I think for her, spirituality in the sort of new age sense came through attempting to heal, which is really beautiful. And she has been on a healing journey her whole life because of her childhood abuse. That has been a big struggle. And within that kind of crossing of new age spirituality and healing, she met this incredible man who's now passed, named Bobby Drinnen, who is a total mystic living on a farm in Tennessee called Rainbow Crest Farm.
Love that.
And he discovered at a young age that he had this kind of spiritual psychic powers, and he would find people's animals that had gone lost and things. And anyway, by the time I met him, he had a really robust practice of seeing people one-on-one, and in what I would regard nowadays as like spiritual mentorship or teaching. Though at the time we looked at it more as like psychic mediumship in a way, but he was really teaching us about spirituality, and he was teaching it because he was in touch with the other side directly, so he was really, his antennas were really, really, really open. So he would, I'd walk into his office for a session with him. We would drive for 6 hours to go see him. Maybe I was 12 or 13. And he would say, okay, in my dream last night, you were like, hey, I want to talk about this. And it was funny because a lot of the things that I came to him in his dream to tell him were like about boys. So it's like, he's like, you told me it's time. You want to talk about Mike. And I'm like, yeah, I want to talk about Mike, but he would humor me in that regard. And then he would go into deep spiritual teachings with me.
Yeah.
And he would explain big spiritual concepts to me, in a really digestible language. And, we're in 90s in Georgia and Tennessee. It's like, he's teaching me about the laws of karma and what I'm here on the planet to do. He's like, okay, you're going to go into these classrooms, and if you fail, you're going to have to do the classroom again. So the lesson is coming, and, your dad and you are having this lesson. And he was just really trying to teach me spiritual laws in a very non-denominational, just a very simple way. He hadn't been indoctrinated into yoga or, Vedic teachings or anything like that. This was all through his gnosis, through his psychic channel, which is really cool because, this was pre-internet, pre-anything. It's just like, it was very pure that you knew that his teachings, his mystical knowledge was coming from the other side, was coming from truth. And nowadays you can go to a bunch of psychic mediums, mystics, healers, and they could have just read something on the internet real quick and like just be passing off someone else's teachings to you.
Yeah.
And it was very clear that he had a very big portal and channel anyway. And so he was in my life until he passed. when I was 30. So he was in my life for 30 minus 12, 18 years. Is that right, math? Yes, that is.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
great.
correct.
um, and that I would consider as like that was a big portal. On the very other side, on the religious side, like my father grew up. My father's Brazilian, and so I would spend time with him traveling between Brazil and the U.S. And my grandmother was a very mystical, devout Catholic, and she kind of indoctrinated me into prayer and mantra with Mother Mary and rituals and like these very mystical Catholic rituals that happened in Brazil. And a lot in Brazil is also influenced by the African slaves that were taken and brought over and brought with them a lot of their culture and rituals and mysticism, which has now been integrated into Brazilian culture in general. Like Brazilian culture is so African, because of their vast slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays it's like, there's a beauty to Brazilian culture. Unfortunately, it came through tragedy, but there's a beauty to Brazilian culture because it has all these different mystical kind of mergings there. So I got to experience that when I went to Brazil as a child. And that everyone wore white on New Year's, and there were all these different rituals that people did. And that was very different than the religious experience I had in Georgia, which was very Presbyterian. And sometimes I would go to the Methodist church and the Baptist church. And again, at a young age, like when I was like 12 or 13, I was really seeking something. And so I would go to all the different churches and kind of just try them. And I was so curious. And some of them, you had to come to the front and get saved, and people were speaking in tongues and laying on the ground. And I just remember it being so exciting and
Yeah.
so weird, and also an opportunity for deep emotional catharsis, because all these 12, 13-year-old girls, I don't know, I would recommend the movie. What was that documentary called? I think it wasn't called Church Camp, but it was like something camp. It was like one of these
Okay.
evangelical camps where all the kids are crying and just emoting and just like on their knees, like, please save me, God. And there's something so beautiful and theatrical and trance-like around this emotional expression of this Christian mystical tradition, right? And that didn't exist in the Presbyterian church. They were very austere, very straight-laced. But in the Baptist or the evangelical, it's just like speaking in tongues, laying on of hands. And I just remember being like, this is so cool. And my mom was a little worried. She was like, honey, I'm not really into you going to those churches, because she was just like, it's very extreme over there. But I was kind of going out of curiosity and and my own desire to like be outside the constructs of social norms, because there you got to be outside the constructs of, you could lay on the ground and go, oh,
Right.
as an
Right.
expression of your soul or your pain or whatever. So my early years, I would say my preteen years and teen years, there was a lot of curiosity and in general, and my spirituality and my sexuality. And I felt like such an outsider, because no one else that I knew was having those kind of deep desire for experimentation in both of those domains. Most people really thought I was pretty weird for wanting to like kiss boys and kiss girls, and wanting to like go speak in tongues on the ground and like, whatever.
So, excuse me, but just it's
Yeah,
really fascinating your story, because
you can cut
it's
me off anytime.
it sounds like, from that young age of, early adolescence, you were exploring these domains simultaneously of your sexuality and of your spirituality. And so how did
Yeah.
all of that inform your work, your great book, and really your sacred sexuality articulation? And could you talk about that, like your vision of sacred sexuality from that inception period of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think by the time I was a bit more mature and moved to New York, and I discovered yoga and I discovered Eastern traditions. I felt like I found something that felt a little bit more true for me. And so when I discovered yoga and meditation when I was 18, when I moved to New York, I read Be Here Now, and I one of my friends, as I mentioned, was part of the SRF community, so she was a meditator and she meditated every morning and every night. And so I would, a lot of the time, not all the time, but I would meditate with her. And I found my first amazing yoga class. That was like a real yoga class. It was on the Lower East Side, and it was in this community center, and it was a real yoga class for 90 minutes. And the time I discovered kirtan and Krishna Das, I was 18, and this is 20 years ago, and chanting and going to Jiva Mukti Yoga Center and Union Square in New York and listening to Bhagwan Das. And so something in me crystallized in a different way when I met that different part of the spiritual canon on planet Earth, I would say. And that was problematic for my sexuality, though, because when I discovered yoga in that way through those dudes who were amazing, it didn't feel super integrated for women or sexuality. It didn't feel very conducive to the feminine body and feminine experience. It felt more like an ascetic, and the more ascetic path, like via the Yoga Sutras, like a sattvic diet, all of these kind of things. And at the time I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna, I never was like, I'm gonna be celibate for years, but I was like, oh, I'm gonna wear white, and I'm gonna, be all namaste. And so I really went through a phase of doing that. And then I was like, oh, this isn't it either. Now I'm having to like put my sexuality on the side, or my wildness on the side, or my Shakti. Like it wasn't like a Shakti based kind of feminine goddess kind of a transmission. Even though Ram does his book, Be Here Now, he's so about like honoring the goddess. It's just so much in there. But in terms of the embodied practice, I'm like, these are skinny white dudes or skinny Indian dudes, but they're not shaking their hips and dancing. It's just like very different thing. But eventually with that, I found like earth-based spiritual traditions, and that really freed me in the body in a different way. So there was a lot of study around earth-based spiritual traditions, paganism, ritual, and all of that, and kind of how do I weave that together with yogic practice. So at the time, my sexuality was really confused, not confused about like gender or any of that kind of thing, but confused about how it fit into my life, like how I could be this kind of devotional yogi and also be like a wild woman of the forest. And also, so it took me a long time, is what I'm saying, to really find an integration. And I don't know if it's 100% done. I think it's like integrating the lower and upper chakras. It's like, the tantric path is to me the path of integration. And I don't mean neo-tantric, I mean more classical tantric, where as a householder, someone who's not living in an ashram, you can integrate your daily chores and your marriage or relationship and your sexual life and your devotional life and whatever. But it's not just about sexual life, it's about all of the life. I think
Yeah.
that's a common misconception, is people, when they consider like a tantric understanding, it's like they think of it as sexual, and it's like, no, it's actually not sexual, but it's about all of it. And in the other path, it's not about all of it. It's not about your family life or your work life or your money life. It's about your God life. And so the tantric path includes your money life, your home life, your house cleaning, your family life, your sex life is a part of that. So I think that, that's, again, my partner and I, we still have to figure it out. Like we're still like, now we're going to become parents, and like he's used to like meditating a lot of time and having quiet a lot of time, and he's been on much more of a kind of ascetic monk like life, and he's 50, so it's like a lot of his life, I mean not all the time, but like his practice is more monk like.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have a child in the house, so
That's
so I
when
guess
that's when it gets put to the test.
right. To answer your question, I think that the sort of, for me, the ongoing life question around how this the spirituality and the sexuality kind of still come together is it's still a learning on how to essentially work with a big energy like sexual energy in a really sacred way, and to balance that out in your world, and with intention and devotion and prayer and clarity. And it's a practice like any other practice. It's like some days you show up to a practice and you sort of are just like, fuck, I want to do the lazy version. I just want to get off, or I just want to get a good stretch in. And you bring your unconsciousness to it, and you bring your laziness to it. And I think that's fine. Sometimes spiritual people can have, I'm sure, like, I'm not judging at all, can have that, can go into super unconscious sexual realms, And if we're really, really practicing, we're trying not to do that. We're trying to stay conscious in our sexual practices. We're trying to not just go in there to get off. We're trying to stay present with our breath. And it's like any other practice. It can be beautiful and ecstatic, and it can also be more time consuming and it requires more of you than just getting a quick bang in, it's like, and there's nothing wrong with that, if it's just getting a quick bang in, but if you're really attempting, I think, to bring almost to like bring the higher chakras down, it requires a certain level of skill, and I can't say that I'm a master at that, that I can practice. And then there's times where my conditioning of growing up in this society is just like, I just want to be sexy, or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing learning. My book was more about the healing aspect, which is not what I'm talking about right now. And that's more, it's a little less in the spiritual domain. That's more in like, I mean, the book is in the spiritual domain, but also in the healing space of, well, how do we, in order to even show up to a great practice with a partner or a lover, what needs to be looked at first? What needs to be healed? Of course, some of that healing will happen in the moments of practice with a partner or a lover, but also what needs to be looked at in our own personal relationships to ourselves and to the divine. And so, this
so
is a
can
whole
you
other...
offer a couple, because I wanted to stop you there, please, just because it's so beautiful and so profound what you're saying. So in the way of healing first, what are, say, 5-ish crystallized, most powerful in your experience in the way of healing, either practices or darshanas, like viewpoints or things to think about for the listeners when they're working on healing themselves from the way of their own sexuality, their relationship with their sexuality, and desire to integrate it into their own spirituality and create that tantra, which literally means to loom together, all parts, like you said, of one's life and oneself. So could you please offer a few of, you think, most potent ideas and or practices to do so?
Yeah. I mean, the first, which is outside of the spiritual domain and is in the more therapeutic, is to go to therapy and to process intellectually and mentally, to let the mental body really have its time. I think that's where culturally we are right now. We're having a lot of space for the collective mental bodies of people to start processing through the dysfunctional patterns of family and society, which can feel a little like over psychologizing everything. And it can feel sort of spiritually dry there in a way. But it's kind of it kind of needs to happen, and we have to come into an awareness. So it's kind of the awareness practice side of things. It's more of
Yeah.
like, let's come into awareness. Hey, I was abused. Hey, I went through this. Hey, I was silenced, whatever. Moving out of being a victim, moving into, okay, I'm aware of this. Now what do I do with the imprints in my nervous system, body, belief systems, etc. So that is a big part of it. And I say this in my book, my first book. I'm like, first, you really do have to come into awareness,
Yeah.
And the sexuality piece, for most everyone, there is an awareness that needs to happen around our conditioning. If we did ever have any experiences that are still sort of seated within us in a uncomfortable way, I haven't met anybody who hasn't needed to do a little bit of work there,
And
because
I
we live.
love that. Because
Yeah.
asking the questions, back to the initial answer, right? Ask the questions. So is there a question, because you're so eloquent and poignant and potent with your words and your book, is there a question that you think is the most helpful question in the arena that you're speaking?
Mm,
One can ask themselves if they're listening.
yeah. Definitely, what beliefs do I have around myself, my body, and my sexuality that aren't mine, that didn't come from me, that came from society, my parents, other influences, and just writing down what are the beliefs that I hold in general and getting really honest around your sexuality. What are the beliefs that I hold? There may be some very unconscious ones that are not present yet in your awareness. You can examine what those are by just thinking about your last sexual experience. And you can go, if I look back at the last time that I had sex, what beliefs or what behaviors came forward, and what would those behaviors indicate was a belief I was living, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, that I needed to be hot or sexy or thin or something. I felt that because when I took my clothes off, I sort of sucked in my belly. So you sort of connecting the dots between your
Yeah.
behaviors, right? And then how those behaviors lead back to a belief system or conditioning that you've been playing out for a very long time. So it's kind of a basic question, but it is an unearthing there.
No, that's so good. That's so good to give people, because I love giving people really concrete ways to
Yeah.
think about things and takeaways from this podcast so that they can really integrate into life. And that's really profound to unpack that for sure.
Yeah. And it can take years, so don't try to get it done in one afternoon.
And make it a practice, like I love what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, and do that committed work. Like, ask yourself the question, perhaps it's called in the yogic tradition the dharana. You pose the question, you throw it out like you would offer a rock to a pond, and then you may be writing, automatic writing, or whatever your practice is, contemplation, and then, like you're saying, walk away, and then
Mm-hmm.
maybe for a week, the next day do it again, and just kind of a
Right.
consistent practice over a period of time can
Yeah.
yield great fruit. Really profound.
Yeah.
Really profound.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
with you, I've heard you speak, and I love how you articulated being a woman and identifying as such this lifetime. And the sometimes in the society's economy in this day and age of, often we've gone so much from, at least this is my opinion, the kind of, I don't know. I mean, my mother was like a feminist, is a feminist, in the 1970s, and in this country of America, fighting for equal rights and feminism and this fieriness. And now, more recently, there's a lot of, I feel like, popularity with the soft feminine, and like almost like a reactionary to that,
Mm-hmm.
and finding that balance for those of us who identify as female, that balance of fieriness and softness, and that journey. And you've spoken about that. So I'd love for the listeners to
Mm-hmm.
think about that. They don't identify as female, really important contemplation for the females around them. And so, yeah, would you talk a little bit about that journey for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think and it can apply to any gender, because basically, I mean, we're gonna talk about it a little from the feminine experience, but any gender expression has gone through these phases of archetypal embodiment that sometimes get really sort of played out and then need to be integrated, and something else needs to be explored archetypally in the collective. And so, I mean, men have their own very distinct journey around this as well, as around
Completely.
kind of going through these different tones or elements, or almost like notes on a keyboard that you would play, that you're like, wow, culture is really playing this one note when it comes to masculinity or femininity, or right. Or like, then the response to that one note is this other note. And it's kind of like, it's not really a solution, because if you look to the goddess and the goddesses, let's say, across the different pantheons of different cultures across the world, you would see that there are goddesses that reflect all these different notes and tones of femininity, just like gods that reflect different notes and tones of masculinity, just like elements that reflect different aspects of elemental expression, or elemental and archetypal expression. So it's just, I always like to remind people that it's not about landing anywhere. It's not landing in the soft. It's not landing in the fierce. It's not landing in the fiery or landing in the lover. It's not, that's again just another ego trap of too over identification with
Yeah.
something. It's more like, can you be a rainbow? Can you be the keyboard, right? Do you have access to different parts of you? So I
Right.
think what you're saying, though, is that there was this, of course, and when you look back in culture, it's like there was this like fiery feminist, like badass, and then there's like the girl boss. There's all these different kind of expressions of that are in opposition to what we possibly experienced through our grandmothers, and our moms were rebelling against that 1950s housewife kind of thing, and they were becoming empowered women feminists and being able to work and be a mom and all this stuff, right? And then we're like, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody who's like, oh my gosh, well, I don't want to have to be super self-sufficient, and I don't want to have to do it all. Actually, I prefer not to, but mom fought so that I could do it all, which is great, and I'm happy that I can have a job and run a company or whatever, and also be a lover. It's quite nuanced, though. I work with a lot of clients, a lot of women who have really developed their sense of being strong, badass, running businesses, making lots of money. They still usually look great while they're doing it. So they're also taking time to make sure that they look good and feel good. But there's a hardening that has happened in their heart and in their yoni, usually as well, though that's not usually something people identify up front. They usually just feel like, wow, I feel a little dried up. I feel a little hardened, and I feel a little far from my eros or my sense of being a lover. And so I think that's something that I see a lot in women. It's like a tightening in the jaw, like an over badassness that has now created a persona that is invulnerable. And so I think some women are going, wow, so now I want to soften that, right? Now I want to like, ooh, that's actually repelling a potential lover, because I'm like coming with this hardened energy. I might look really hot on the surface. I might have all the trappings of sexiness, but energetically I'm hardened.
Totally. I have a lot of
And
women clients who are in that place as well.
yeah, and
And
it
like
makes
you said so
sense.
beautifully, like it's so much a part about knowing oneself, identifying in that key concept of awareness, becoming
Yeah,
aware of what's happening within oneself. So then you can apply the counter or more balancing aspects of self, and that's going to change, like you said, be the rainbow. At any given moment, there's you might have a week where you're just pushing and your adrenals are starting to get shot, and so then in
right.
that moment, how can I apply more of that softness, more of that
Yeah,
breath work, more of that feeling, my auric field even, and doing that
yeah,
meditation, whatever it is in the way of expansion and softness. And then other weeks we feel differently. And so
yeah,
it's that skillful application that you're speaking of, which is so important and so much about this journey of self-knowing, and also not airbrushing, that spirituality that we're
Yeah.
talking about, that real integration. Like, what am I really feeling, experiencing, living, and then how can I work with that to come into more alignment so I can be the highest, most potent expression of my soul and self in this lifetime and this work that I'm doing in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What about I loved your work in terms of attracting partners or sacred lovers, because that's something a lot of my clients talk about and have a desire to. So what are some tips and practices and thoughts about that for people who deeply desire sacred partnership, sacred sexuality, etc.?
Yeah.
Could you speak to that?
My neighbors are having coffee outside. I hope you can't hear them. It's
We
really cute of
can't.
them. I can't get mad at them for that.
No. Integrating life.
Of course. Yeah. So I had a great journey with this, and part of it was first me claiming that I wanted to be in a spiritual partnership deeply. Like, I had claimed it on the surface, but I hadn't really claimed it inside, and that was a process. And when I did really claim that I wanted to be within a spiritual partnership, which meant I wanted to be with a man who's a spiritual practitioner, not somebody that had gone to like one Vipassana retreat or, done a few therapy sessions or read Way of the Superior Man, but like a man who was a practitioner. That was a scary thing to claim. And then it was even scarier when I met him, and it was quite terrifying. So I was like, oh shit, he's been on his path for 30 years and he's like a deep practitioner. And he's going to call me into some depth and out of my bullshit. So, but it took a while to get there. And I did a lot of deep work. First examining, and I would give this recommendation to everybody, is like to really know your shadows, like to really get to know your shadows. And if that word is confusing to you, it's like you can use a more therapeutic term, though that term really, I think, is been brought into the collective by the work of Carl Jung, who was a therapist, but in a very spiritual way, in depth psychology. And now that word has been kind of used and appropriated in many different ways that I think are probably different than his original definition. But getting to know your shadows, your patterns, your unconscious tendencies, and your deepest wounds, because your wounds are going to dictate kind of where you go, and you're going to keep attracting the same type of people. Carl Jung quote, speaking of that, is like, something like, you can know your unconscious by, or it's like, what's that quote? It's like fate is your unconscious. Like, fate, quote, air quotes, fate is actually your unconscious leading the show. I can't remember the quote verbatim.
So good.
So you think it's fate. Oh my God. And it's like, no, that's your unconscious tendency to go towards unavailable men. Cute, not fate. Your unconscious is leading the show.
So true.
So it's like just seeing the patterns that arise in your love life, right? Like, what are the patterns that keep, if you're single, like what are the patterns, if you're single and you want to have a partner, what are the patterns that keep arising? What are the things that you're noticing? What's the thing that's happening? That is the key to who you are on the inside. And that is a painful reckoning.
Yes.
And people like to blame anybody else for that.
Well, that's exactly it. Exactly. You just nailed it. And I was going to say something along those lines, that it's about taking responsibility for if you are always attracting the same kind of person, or if you can, quote unquote, never find a person, or fill in the blank. It's whatever story you tell yourself.
Exactly.
How do I actually take responsibility for that story, realizing that I am actually the author of my life, and half the time it's a ghost author called my unconscious.
I love that. You should use that quote. The ghost author is my unconscious. So cute. Get out of here. Literal ghost author. You can't see it.
Literal. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for noticing that. So and so that's just brilliant what you said, that it's part of reckoning that, like, I have to actually take responsibility completely, completely, because I know when I'm working with people, and, I'm sure like you, working one-on-one with people, so much of the work is from my own experience, and what's worked for me, and that's what's helpful for others, the truth of that, the energetics of that.
Right.
And so much of it is like, okay, not cleaning up my side of the street. You hear that a lot, and I'm a fan of that, to an extent. But
Yeah.
it's like doing more than that, cleaning up the whole street. Like, clean up the whole freaking street. You clean up the whole street, and chances are you have actually only cleaned up half or three quarters, like whatever you think you've done, but clean all of it up. And,
Yeah.
even the people that have perhaps, done things or acted in ways that were out of alignment, they're still teachers and teachings, and they're still there to act as mirrors to show us where we need to clean up the street. So
Totally. So I
right.
definitely think that's kind of, the first step is really knowing your patterns, knowing the tendencies. And if you have this belief that, oh, but no, not all my relationships are really different. Now, they may look different on the surface, but like if you sit down and really contemplate, you will find the thread. You'll find the thread. Like you said, whether it's, oh, there's no one out there for me, all of those things are the stories. I do believe there's such a thing as karmic timing. And so I see amazing women who I work with or who are my friends who are so open, so heart soft, available, who haven't met their partner, and who want to. And I also do believe that there is something like karmic timing. And who am I to know if there's not also a thread that's like kind of still in the air blocking them, in some way.
Yeah. Well, and that's the paradox, excuse me, but like that's what you're saying, I love, because it's what you said initially. That's sometimes it's both. Sometimes
exactly.
it's, obviously we can't know the answer, like you said too, right? But often I think it could be also a both.
Yeah.
And I think it can be, for sure, in my experience, accelerated, the timing, if we're doing practices of psychological work like you're speaking to, and then spiritual work like making your bedroom beautiful and assessing the habitual energetics of what's happening in things that pertain to your love life. What do you think about all that?
I mean, I love all of it. I think mostly it's in your body, in your heart. And so, for me, doing practice around feminine embodiment, do I know how to open? I did a lot of practice and workshops where I was standing in front of men. I talked about this a little bit in my first book, and I was getting really direct reflections on how my energy was reading, like without words, no talking, just feeling and breathing in front of a man, and him being like, wow, when I first walked over to stand in front of you, you felt like this open fairy, like beauty. And then within 4 seconds, I just felt like an ice queen, like you just shut down. And this is with no words exchange. And feeling like, wow, how is my energy really reading? Like, how available is my heart to a room? How is my body moving through a space? How is my breath moving through a space? All of these become either invitations or closures, like openings or closures to anything in life, to money, to success, to whatever. So I work a lot on that level with people and with women, as just like, is your heart energetically open? Is your body energetically open? Is there so much hardness and closure in you that there can be an incredible man standing in front of you, but he can't feel you, or you could be wanting so much to communicate your radiance, but you don't know how. Right? You've locked it up, or you've put a shield on for so many years because of your traumas and da 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 da. So a lot of work that I did on myself was removing some of those masks and layers, which is a lot of tenderizing and opening. And I did a lot of work in workshops with men. And that was so helpful. Like 3 men who are like my friends still now to this day, who we practice together as practice partners, not as lovers ever. They really helped me to just energetically know what it feels like to open fully and to express fully. And again, not with words, not intellectually, but energetically.
That is so poignant. And those practices, which are often, my orientation is Tantra as well. And, they can seem so simple,
Yeah.
But again, offering our listeners really concrete things like you're talking about, like standing in front of someone. And as your journey was so gorgeously healed and how it unfolded, they can be people that we're not necessarily going to be lovers with or in a romantic relationship. But when it comes to romantic relationship, as you're eloquently saying, doing practices with others, it could be standing, in the eye gazing. It could be, being seated and having your backs to each other. There's so many
Right.
sweet practices that it's seemingly so simple, but
Yeah.
that can really open up, like you're saying, the energetics and the
Mm-hmm.
feeling of being receptive,
Mm-hmm.
softer,
Yeah.
spreading those antennas out more and really connecting you to the ground of your being. Because I think when
Yeah.
people are established in the ground of their being, that, and obviously it's really the field of love,
Yeah.
that love with a
Yeah.
capital L, that's when they can receive
Yeah.
the romance, the lovers, the connection really
Yeah.
that is
And
available to
yeah.
them.
And first doing it solo and having that really dialed in solo, I think is important before
Mm,
you sort of bring it into partner practice and you sign up for that workshop or whatever. And please make sure that you really know that you're signing up for a workshop with a really trustable facilitator if you are going to do any kind of partner work, because some of it out there right now is really horrific. But first do it on your own, learn how to open on your own. That is so important. And I think a lot of people skip over that part of things, and then they get to a workshop and they're like, I want the man to open me, or I want this. And it's like, no, you need to know how to open on your own. You need to know how to open your heart and your radiance and to express and to be deeply within your body and within the field of love and the ground of being. If you haven't connected to that, you are love on your own, and you go to a workshop to try to figure out how to connect to that via someone else, you're back in that core wound or in that shadow pattern, right?
yeah.
It's like, so I definitely, I think doing that work. And I will say that my own journey of like the healing part was a fucking like, whew, it was a long road and there was a lot of deep work. And I did that through therapy, and I did that through deep plant medicine ceremony with trusted practitioners. And like, I had to do a lot of work around healing with my dad. And, there was so much there for me that I couldn't skip over in
Yeah.
order to meet love.
Yeah.
And there was harrowing at times. Not everybody's journey is like that. Not everybody has that kind of karma with men or with dad or with what, the masculine, so to speak. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's part of what you can't skip over. Whatever healing piece has to be acknowledged. And then you have to have your own solo practice, a way that you get in touch with your own heart first. And then you can
Always.
kind of show up to another and go, hey, like, I want to open my heart to you. And then you kind of go through the portals of discernment and knowing that you can trust yourself if it's a yes or a no, and all of this kind of relearning.
Beautiful. Really, really
Yeah.
helpful. So
Yeah.
what are ways that you like to ritualize or offer ritual into your life in this moment in time? I know before we got on the official, recorded aspect of this podcast, we spoke briefly about, your new book coming up, and maybe it connects the answer to my question to that. And we, spoke about having different phases as creators
Yeah.
and honoring those phases. But I'm curious, in this moment of your life, let's start there. What are
Mm-hmm.
ways that you're really integrating rituals? What are they, if you don't mind sharing one or two? And then maybe speak about, your book coming up and how, you feel about your past book and now coming into this new phase as well.
Yeah. A lot of the rituals now, I was thinking about this actually, I don't know, yesterday or something. My partner and I do a lot of ritual together. And from the beginning of our relationship, like one of our first dates, I was laughing the other day. I was like, babe, you remember on that first date where we like trekked up to like this secret spot in the woods in this aspen grove? We took off all our clothes and we sat in front of each other in little yogi positions, and we drank cacao, and we had a heart to heart about like what we wanted in relationship. And I was like, I gotta tell, before I fall in love with this guy, I gotta be real honest about what I want. I'm like, I want to have a family in the next 2 years. But our relationship started with ritual. It started seated on meditation cushions and drinking tea. He is a part of a tea tradition that's very meditative. It's very much like seated meditation for 45 minutes, an hour with tea, very ritualistic. So he brought that into my life in a beautiful way. And now we've been together for 3 years. And tea is like this morning we sat in tea ritual at 7 a.m. in silence. And then we pulled cards, and we don't do that very often, but sometimes we do. He'll say, get us some cards, and also cacao is a ritual that he brought into my life too. And so on the full moon this weekend, we did a ritual and we drank cacao, and we did a ritual from one of his teachers around blessing our baby. And so we're kind of freaks in the way that like we've been deep divers on the path for a while. So it's just who we are. I say this to like my students and clients. I'm like, don't compare yourself to us, because we've been like, in this practice of living from a spiritual lens and perspective for 20, 30 years. And so not everybody's going to want to do that,
So what are things that you tell your clients? Because totally, it's brilliant
to do. That's more
like
practical.
Simple things that are practical. So because some people here, I mean, people listening to my podcast, they've heard me talk about rituals and so many different things, but at the same time, like you said, and like for myself, it's like the level of ritual I do is like a lot of people would have to quit their job. I do so much, like the planning. But what are simple ways for people who are like, things, I don't have time, but what does that mean?
Simple things. Light a candle first thing when you wake up in the morning. The house is dark. Hopefully you're waking up when it's dark a little bit early. Light a candle, put on some soft music or chanting. You can light a stick of incense every morning. Basically greeting the day in a way that's sacred and honoring not getting on your phone first thing in the morning, first doing those rituals, right? Like you have that moment, light a candle, invite warmth into the home, invite a beautiful scent into the home, invite soft music into the home. You can do the same things in the evening. I'm really big about these things, and I've been doing them for a long time. You can have a time of the day where you sort of power down, devices go off. Again, maybe you light a candle, maybe you and your partner take a bath together. You add in some yummy salts and some oils, and that can be a releasing of the day, a releasing of the energies that you've met that day. To me, that's really important. I have this kind of domestic ritual side that like loves to make sure, open the windows, let the air, take out the old, like be intentional. Saying prayers before meals, something my mom brought into my life, very important. Saying a gratitude or two at the end of the day where you're lying in bed by yourself or with your partner or family. They're tiny little things, but they create intention in your life, and take you out of the casual, consumeristic, capitalistic, work-driven mentality and into something slightly more intentional and sacred. And so you can add in those little moments as much as you want, and especially I think women, if you are inclined, that's you being the priestess in your home. That's you tending to the energy as you're cleaning, you're clearing. Maybe you leave a flower at an altar if you have an altar. So you do these little things to just honor your life, honor the space, honor the energy that you're creating around you. So, there's a million things that you can do. Just tending, it's gardening, it's cleaning, it's clearing, but in the energy is not just in the physical.
Really, really helpful. Yeah. And if you're identified as male, you're the priest or the monk of your home temple. And just what you're saying, they're really helpful. They seem so simple, but like you're mentioning, that consistency and that intentionality behind them to clean, to clear, to disconnect so you can actually connect to something deeper, greater, and more expansive, and showing up in that, way that's consistent every day or once a week, whatever you do, that's what becomes ritual. And like Jung also talks about, right? When we do ritual, our unconscious then becomes conscious. We're
Yeah.
taking, parts of the unconscious and saying, okay, let me direct you to consciously what I want. So
Right. Exactly.
I love your examples. There was quite a few, and they're really, really helpful. So thank you for that. And
Yeah.
now about your new work and
Yeah.
that
So,
leaving of the old, and what are your thoughts about that?
yeah, after my first book really talked about sort of healing that split between spirituality and sexuality and really integrating the body, the embodied experience, the emotional experience, um, into life and really becoming that whole and embodied woman, like really like nailing the solo practice in a way. My next book's really about the relational field, and it's called Dare to Feel: The Transformational Path of the Heart. And the transformational path of the heart is learning and healing and alchemizing through the horizontal, the heart to heart, the human to human, the relational field, whether it's with our parents, our kids, our friends, our lovers. But seeing the heart opening and the heart alchemizing as a spiritual practice and path that we engage with every day, instead of just that vertical path of sitting on the meditation cushion and connecting with the vertical and connecting with God or consciousness, and having that be sort of a gateway to the divine. The other gateway to the divine is through that horizontal, through the heart to heart. So the book has a lot of stories in it. It's like very feminine in that way of like telling stories to learn instead of just sharing teachings from the left brain. It's like embodied, raw, visceral experience and rituals. There's a ritual with every chapter, and kind of contemplations you can write or just contemplate in your mind around. So yeah, it's fun because it's just like a lot of crazy stories. And not crazy stories too, but about the path of the heart and like opening and failing and getting hurt and opening your heart again, and you know the path of feeling, the path of emotions, and how they are these alchemical sort of portals or invitations into life or not, right, depending if we shut them down. So yeah, I'm excited for this book. It's going to be really fun, I think.
It sounds scintillating. And when does that come out?
It comes out January 16th, 2024.
Nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So our audience can mark their
Yeah. Yeah.
planners,
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
in their phones and such.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it because it sounds really, again, practical, which I'm all about, and like asking questions and doing that kind of work. I mean, reading's so fantastic, and I'm just a voracious reader. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on too is because I really appreciate how intellectual you are, and you really
Mm-hmm.
embrace that quality, but then
Yeah.
align it with your spirituality and integrate it. And yet with books, the majority of them aren't participatory and
Right.
active. So I love that your new book has that element, which is so beautiful because it's again that real integration of all of it.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's my desire, to have the integration of all of it, to be able to have an intellectual conversation and also to have a super embodied, energetic conversation. And I hope that, we can all develop that, both sides of the coin.
Yeah, well, it's so fascinating because you mentioned Ram Dass just as we start to wrap up. And who doesn't love Ram Dass? I mean, we don't need to even comment. I mean, to comment on Ram Dass is like trying to add to Monet's painting. Ram Dass is Ram Dass. If you don't know Ram Dass, just look him up and read everything he's written. But Ram Dass, the prototype, quintessential Maha great Western yogi. Last night I was starting to wind down, doing my winding down practices, but I had things in the household to do because I'm a mama, so I'm folding laundry to ungodly hours of the day. And so I thought, what do I want to do? And it was just like, I want to keep, I was wanting to be aligned with my spirituality and really feel inspired and connected to my soul, but I was exhausted and I was folding laundry in a dark basement. And so I was like, let me look. And I typed in Ram Dass, and he has a podcast,
Yeah.
a collection of his talks, which I'd remembered a long time ago and I've heard years ago, but it's been quite a while and I had forgotten that. So I just was like, did the old like tarot Spotify shop. Like I just like swiped and I was like, well, okay, universe, which one am I supposed to listen to? And I clicked on it, and I just haven't been interfacing with his work forever. And I ended up taking it upstairs. I ended up falling asleep to it. It was just like his message is so good. And he was talking about it's really a metaphor for how we can, click on different channels of our life. And he was talking about, we've got the physical channel, and we point to that. Then we've got the, channel of the psyche, and we have to work on our psychology. And then there's the channel of, where we look ourselves in the mirror and see that reflection. And then the many mirrors that we start to notice, okay, not only is my reflection and I can reflect the divine back to myself, but that there's a multiplicity of mirrors, like when you go to, like a boardwalk or something, and they have those magical mirror places, and you see all the reflections of yourself. And when we start to practice and go to the channel where we see ourselves and everyone, and then that last channel where it all goes away and it's just the oneness. And so I love this conversation so much, and there are no accidents, because I feel like you really touched on all those channels, and we're emphasizing the importance, right, of all those channels. It's not just one channel. We don't just go to the, oh, it's all good, it's all one. I hate that phrase when everyone's like, it's all good. It makes me nuts. Oh, it's all good. Of course it's all good on one level, but I think it's level. It's a whole nother podcast. It's become so hackneyed and it's so intrinsically patriarchal and whatever. Right. But I
love that you're listening to Ram Dass. When I'm folding laundry, I often listen to Ram Dass, or I'm doing household stuff. Yeah. It's like a Sunday afternoon, kind of like, I don't think about putting on that podcast. Like when I'm driving, it's too lulling for me or something like that. But there's something about, I also, when I'm like doing laundry or like changing the sheets or something like that, I'll put it on, and I'm always so excited in a way by it. Like I'm always inspired by it in some way. And there are great recycled talks on there that they pick the really good ones. And yeah,
I love that. We have that connection. That's so serendipitous and not accidents. Well, Alexandra, would you mind just closing our conversation out with anything you wish to offer? Benediction, a little guided meditation, whatever feels in alignment with you in this moment.
So if you're listening and you're not driving, if you can take a pause and close your eyes, and just putting one of your hands on your heart and inhaling through your nose deeply. And I want you to soften the whole front surface of your body as you continue to deeply inhale, letting your belly hang out, softening all the way down to your pelvic floor. And then exhaling through your mouth with a little sigh. And you can do that for 2 more breaths and really feel the front surface of your body start to release any stress, any tension, any holding from your throat, melting down through your heart, into your stomach, your lower belly. And by the time you exhale again with an HA, you can put your hand down and just feel where your heart is today, where your heart is after finishing participating, witnessing, listening to this conversation. What can you feel along the front surface of your body? Physically, emotionally, energetically? Is there warmth there? Is there cold? Whatever it is, don't try to judge it. Just let it be. Just notice. In this moment, is there a way with my next breath that I could gently allow that whole front surface of my body to open? And just having that in your awareness for the rest of today. Is my heart opening or closing to this moment? Could I breathe more into my heart, into my belly, all the way down to my pelvic floor? And could I invite myself to open into the moment just a little bit more? Sending you off with that, my desire and prayer for you is that you're able to live and move through this life with a beautiful, discerning heart that opens and closes, that regenerates like a beautiful flower or butterfly. And so it is.
That was really, really, really luscious. So sweet. I love that invitation, listeners, all day long. To feel into the front of your heart. Invite it to be open a little more, perhaps. Alexandra, where can folks find out about you and your really important, profound work in this world?
Oh, thank you. So my website is just my name, alexandraroxo.com, and my Instagram is the same. And so any of those places you can find me.
Go check her out, people. Well, thank you so much for being here. And my Modern Mystic members are so blessed by your generous offer. So all my Mystic members are receiving from Alexandra her sensual embodiment practice. And just hearing you lead that gorgeous meditation, I can't wait for the members to experience. I can't imagine how divine that sensual embodiment practice must be. So thank you, Alexandra, for that.
Well, enjoy. And you can always DM me, let me know how it goes for you.
So folks listening, if you want to become a Mystic member, I've got a beautiful membership on an elegant platform with yoga, meditation, mindfulness, mystic hacks, learning to work with your energy and psychic abilities, astrology, and more. So go to modernmystic.love and check it out, and also receive Alexandra's beautiful practice as a gift.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for just showing up in such a unique and really soft and wise and inspiring and sparky way. I love your energy, and I wish you much success with your second book as you start to punctuate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Namaste.